Okay, I don't know how many of you. I don't know how many of you managed to grab that really excellently designed booklet that Gather have produced. If you have, do turn to the back. There is that hexagon diagram and the 6 different things. You don't need to have it in front of you. It just might help if you do. I thought it would be helpful just to take probably 5 or 7 minutes, something like that, to give an update on what I see of where we stand as Renew Oxford and how things are developing. Looking at the things around that hexagon, I would say that right now we have some great relationships. I mean, as Dave really helpfully articulated, not everyone always plays well together in all regards. And yet there are lots of good relationships, and I think trust is building at this time. There is some united prayer that happens, but I would say that our prayer is not everything we would hope it would be. In terms of collaboration, there are a few successes in churches collaborating together. I think of the Oxford Churches Debt Centre. I think of Safe Families in particular. There are other things that also happen where a couple of churches in the city work with one another. And then on some of the other things that are there, like a strategy or having an awareness of which Christians are involved in which spheres of the life of the city, we those things we do not have. And so what we do have at the moment, the thing that I want to let you know about is that through the mapping project that Vicky's going to describe in a bit more detail in a moment, we have found doors beginning to open into more conversations with the city and the county council. I have found that each time I've presented, either in the city, I've presented data showing there's about 160 churches in the city. Many of them are diaspora churches. Many of them have begun more recently. That is, you talked about people being blown away. I mean, even before describing what each of those churches are doing, even the fact that the church in the city looks like that blows people away. I recently knocked together a survey of the faith sector in the county and discovered that although there's a little bit more data still to pursue, there's something like 650 faith communities in the county, meaning local churches, mosques, gurdwaras, the odd, I was going to say the odd anything. I don't mean that they're odd. I'm aware of one pagan circle, well organised. There's a few other things. Of those 650 identifiable faith communities in the county, about 620 are churches, which again I think is different to the perspective that people would have. And as I've named those things to people working in public life, they've been like, oh, that's interesting. Please can we talk more? Please could you come and represent those things in our different settings? So I then found myself in a meeting of the denominational leaders of churches together in Oxfordshire, and there was a similar interest there amongst leaders of denominations who have spent good time over years building relationship with one another, but have not had the time or the energy or the priority or the resources perhaps to look out and say, how are we all relating to the society around us? And just in the last couple of months, I was invited to take on that role for Churches Together in Oxfordshire. So Bishop Gavin, the Bishop of Dorchester, is one of the 2 presidents of Churches Together in Oxfordshire and is happy to have a focus on the relationship between those churches. I've just agreed to take on being the other co-president with a view to a concern for the relationship of all of those churches to everybody else. And what I found is that I am welcome in that role in council meetings because, as has been said I think a couple of times this morning, there's an appetite for engagement with the faith sector. There's an appetite for engagement with churches, but not wanting to make 160 phone calls to engage with 160 churches of the city. I would be happy. I could talk about that at more length, but I want to hand over to Vicki really soon, because the mapping work is what's going to spark the rest of our conversation this morning. I do want to note, for those of you who've been at these events in previous years, obviously this is a smaller gathering than we've had in the last few years, and that will have struck you perhaps on arrival. I think there's several reasons for that. One is perhaps that we've actually put it in the calendar just a little bit further into the summer than in previous years. And I've certainly had quite a few people say, oh, but I'm going to a wedding or a thing. There's been more people who've had other and generally quite summer-oriented activities already in the calendar for today. We also did have a few events around Pentecost that hopefully you heard of through your church, which happened a few weeks ago. And maybe some people thought, I've done my thing beyond my local church for June. That's also quite possible. But it's also the case that we have, this year of 2025, set ourselves, as Renew Oxford, deliberately into a listening mode through having a mapping project where we're taking time to listen. And what that means is that rather than being in a moment of declaring clear vision and purpose and opportunity, which is the kind of thing that people can see and grab and consider joining in with, we're instead listening. So it's great that you're here today, because we're going to be talking together and listening to what everybody's perspectives are. And through that, it's like the listening moment is also a discerning moment. There are so many things that could be done, but what is it that ought to be done? What are the? I love what you said about seeds and weeds. I mean, I love the seeds more, obviously. What are the seeds that God would have us want? And I think that seeds thing is particularly important for us. And when you here in Oxford, when you hear the stories of movements, unity movements, really picking up speed, very often there was some kind of crisis that crystallised them. A few years ago, we had Lloyd Cook from Stoke-on-Trent speaking at one of these meetings, and he spoke about Stoke-on-Trent being ranked as the worst of 367 cities in the UK to live in. And that somehow woke up the church in Stoke-on-Trent. Sometimes there's been a wave of knife crime or something. Actually, the last more widespread movement of mapping and activity that happened here in the city happened a while ago in the wake of Operation Bullfinch, which, if those of you who perhaps weren't living in the city then, was when the gang organised sexual exploitation of children was exposed here, and the shock of that happening here led to a willingness to get together and to talk and to plan and, crucially, to organise as well. And now, we're not aware, thank God, of any such headline crisis for our city at the moment. But if our unity depends on some crisis, then we're only going to be paying attention to the weeds rather than to the seeds. And I trust God that I think if there were some crisis in our city, between us in this room, we'd know about it. This is a well-connected. Looking around and knowing who's here, this is a well-connected group of people. We'd know if there was such a crisis. What we're instead looking forward to is God drawing our attention to things He's already doubtless brought into existence by way of response, but things that He wants to go from being the mustard seed in its smallness to the tree in its capacity to provide shelter for many.
Right.
Yeah, I think those are the things that I wanted to say. Yeah, let's leave that there. And Vicki, please come and tell us about what's happening with the mapping.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you so much for all who have shared this morning. It's been just so inspiring to have that background of learning about what's going on all over the world, and even closer to home in Lincoln. It just really gives us that vision of what is possible. And it's really clear that while it's easy to stand up here and say over the 10 years this has happened and it seems, oh yeah, we could do that, I can completely understand how complex and difficult it is and how long-term an investment that kind of unifying movement across the city is. And I'm really excited that in Oxford a similar story is happening, that over many, many years there's been a lot of prayer around how do churches work better together, and we're still at the beginning of that momentum building and that relationship building, which is so key to building a network of churches who know how to respond to the needs of their city. So if we've not yet met, I'm Vicki. I work for Viva, which is an international organisation that does this kind of work, but particularly focused on children, youth and families. All over the world, over the last 30 years, we help equip churches to work together in their cities for children who are in really vulnerable situations. If you want any more information about how we do that and stories of change, we've brought our books with us, so feel free to take one with you. But in Oxford, we have been involved in working out how that kind of work looks in the UK. And as you may have heard when I gave a whoop earlier to Jeff's mention of King's Lynn, I do not live here anymore. I used to live in Oxford, but now I'm based in Norfolk, where I'm involved in very similar work through Viva. So we've got these two areas of the UK where we're thinking, how do we take all of this learning of listening deeply, building connections and praying together across churches for the sake of the most vulnerable in our cities, to really make a difference here in the UK as well. And it's been brilliant to be connecting more with Gather in the UK, and there's a number of other groups like Together Network, who I'm kind of almost employed with through Norfolk as well, to really bring all of those that vision together, and to make sure that we're not duplicating, and that we're really clear on what we're doing in our cities around this unity work. So I just wanted to give a quick... Oh, Steve, would you mind plugging my laptop? Sorry, I didn't brief you on that at all, but I have made a PowerPoint, so if you could just...
It's on your laptop.
Yes. Sorry, I totally forgot about that point.
It's all right. You need to log in.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to briefly give a bit of more of a background, if this is maybe your first time engaging with Renew and the mapping, about why we're doing this. So we started out with 4 main areas of reasons why we were undertaking this kind of mapping work in Oxford, to better steward, that's me, better steward resources. So when churches know what others are doing, we can reduce that duplication, share tools and learning, and make more strategic use of what's already happening in the city. To have a stronger connection between churches, but also between the civic sector as well. So that clear picture helps us to connect better across the body of Christ, and it gives local services a clear way, as we've heard a lot this morning already, to connect with us and partner with us if we're not divided, to be a more visible witness in Oxford. So when we're united in this purpose, the church becomes more credible, a consistent witness to the love and justice of God in our communities. And we hope that through doing this kind of work, there will be a stronger response to injustice across the city. So mapping helps us to spot those gaps, to align our vision, and to work together to tackle these systemic issues that affect people's lives in Oxford. So it's really my remit to give us a little bit of a story of where we've got to in the mapping so far. So we started with a citywide survey, and this is really to get a sense of who's already involved in social action, what kinds of activities are already happening, and around 40 churches have responded. We launched this survey in probably around the new year, was when it really kicked off. So we've got around a quarter of churches represented so far in that mapping survey, and the results were really rich and really diverse. Churches are already responding to social need in really deep and relational and really context-specific ways, through things like midweek activities, toddler groups, parenting support, youth mentoring, drop-ins, pastoral care. Many are partnering with schools and local organisations, offering welcome and connection in ways that statutory services just can't. As we've heard, we're not going anywhere, we're often in it for the long haul. We also saw churches being really honest about their limits, so highlighting interest in new areas of work, but also sharing their challenges around capacity, vision, or even confidence. And in some responses, there were many that simply answered don't know to a lot of the questions around social needs in their communities, which isn't a problem at all. We were really clear about if you don't know, we just want to know what's happening, how you feel about your community. It's not a problem, but it is an invitation to connect and to share more of that understanding about our communities a bit more intentionally. So that's why we're now moving into our second phase. Oh yes, here's a nice pie chart ChatGPT made for me. This is all of the 40 churches that responded and the spread of the denominations that we have. So almost 50% independent, about a quarter Anglican and some other there too. So it's quite a nice mix at the moment. We're definitely missing Catholics and Methodists. So if you know any Catholics and Methodists that would like to respond to the survey, please help us to do that. So we're moving into the second phase where we're not just pushing the survey, but we're trying to connect more relationally through stories. So we're inviting leaders, volunteers, staff and clergy to share what they're seeing, what's working, where they feel stretched, and what they imagine might be possible through that deeper connection. We're trying to gather really simple conversations. We've created 2 sets of questions, one for ministry leaders and one for volunteers, and I'll share QR codes for those a bit later on. You can fill them in yourself today or tomorrow, or you can have a conversation with someone and submit someone else's answers. Either way, the point is really to intentionally make those connections and to build those relationships and just to listen to each other and to ask what's going on and just to try and capture some of that, so it's not just stuck within the 2 people who are having the conversation, but if we capture some of that insight, we can gather it as a unified body and share it back and say, did we all know this was happening over here? Did we know these people have these vision? And it's matching up, as we were hearing earlier, about where we might have those overlaps. So the more people that join in, the richer and the more accurate that picture is going to become. And what we're doing in the mapping isn't just about producing a map. It's about building that momentum and building those relationships. And at Viva, we've facilitated that kind of listening in cities all over the world, and we've really seen how that transformation starts, not with the grand strategies, but with that deep trust, shared stories, and the prayerful collaboration. So mapping is just the tool, but the relationships are really the goal. So it was really great to see your 6 themes from Lincoln earlier, because we've just, from reviewing the survey data and from reviewing all of the council and other data that's out there about social issues around Oxford, 6 core themes have begun to emerge. It's been really difficult to nail these down into themes because they overlap, because they're not easy little boxes, and we can't really tackle one without tackling the other. But for the sake of moving forward, it's really helpful to have that framework of thinking about the different areas and ways of who's involved in that kind of work and who can we talk to around these issues and who's really got that passion and that dream for those particular issues. So I'll briefly walk through each theme, starting with some quotes that churches have told us about what they're doing in those areas and how we hope to connect around these issues going forward, to kind of put some meat on the bones of what we might imagine around those issues. So I'd just like to say, if as I go through these themes, something sparks in you and you think, that's me, or I know someone who works in that area, or I know someone that's got the vision for that exact thing, please come and talk to us, and we would just love to get you involved in having those conversations and recording them somewhere so that we can add them to the bigger picture. So supporting children, youth and families. This was the most frequently mentioned area. Churches are running toddler groups, youth mentoring, parenting courses, holiday clubs. So people are saying we run 2 stay and play groups, kids matter groups with the local school, messy church activities. Some others say kids and youth session focused on mental and emotional well-being as well as spiritual growth. And there's also obviously some challenges highlighted in what churches are sharing about that as well. So we're really hoping to speak to those involved in toddler groups in churches like King Centre, St Michael's, Barton, Babies Matter, Kids Matter, parenting programmes, youth mentors, Find Your Fire, SoulNet, Safe Families. If any of that means anything to you, please get in touch. This is an area full of energy, but also with a fair amount of duplication and fragmentation. Imagine what would be possible if churches shared resources, trained leaders together, created joined-up pathways for support for families across Oxford. Our second theme was mental health, addiction and loneliness. So many churches, as we've already heard, offer listening spaces, safe drop-ins, mindfulness courses, support groups. Some are saying we have social care and mental health practitioners that offer support, or they host Christian meditation in youth groups and mindfulness in schools. And others are saying things like, we know it's a really big issue, but we just don't have anything in place yet. So we'd love to connect with groups like Archway, Space Makers, Mind, and other churches that we know are offering things like Alcoholics Anonymous support. This is one of the most spiritually significant and socially complex areas of work. Churches can't fix the system, but we can offer presence, welcome, prayer, healing, alongside others if we're intentional and we're trained on how to do this kind of work together. Thirdly, housing and homelessness. Churches are engaged in night shelters, tenancy support, outreach, and specific work with those that are vulnerably housed. Things like breakfast clubs and street work. And there's a strong collaboration already through, as Steve mentioned, the Oxford Winter Night Shelter, things like Edge Housing at OCC, Turning Point and Gatehouse. It's an area where church collaboration obviously already exists, but where deeper consistency and shared learning and strategic citywide advocacy could make a real impact. So how could we move from that response to having a greater influence across the city? The fourth area is poverty and cost of living. So churches are running CAP courses, food support, practical initiatives, CAP life skills courses. At St Nicholas, we noticed there's a cost of living support on really interesting things like a giving garage, 24/7 refill station and repair cafe, a bike doctor and sharing food from M&S and other local donors. There's loads going on in a really interesting way, and they refer people to CAP and things like that as well. So imagine if churches across the city could work together around those kind of initiatives where there could be dignifying and low barrier practical help so no one falls through those gaps throughout the city, and people can receive support that is close to their own home and in their own community. The fifth area was belonging and inclusion. So obviously many churches, in the very nature of being a church, create welcoming spaces for people from different backgrounds, cultures and abilities. The Holy Family Church said they host a Caribbean social cafe, Blackbird Leys Choir, and work in lockstep with the community. And others mentioned asylum seekers, people with learning disabilities and students from local schools. We'll really want to be connecting with groups like Asylum Welcome, the Jungle Co-op and Mothers Union. But please, again, if you know others working in this area, add them into the conversation. This is the invitation to hospitality in its truest form, and one of the church's deepest callings. Collaborating on this issue could mean learning from those already doing this really well, or creating spaces for all voices to belong. And finally, this theme was mentioned less frequently, but where it is named, there's a real growing energy around what churches could do through collaborative work. One church said, we're working to promote sustainable habits through practical actions and community modelling. At St Nicholas that I mentioned, the refill and the repair hub, it meets both the environmental and financial needs. So we're hoping to be able to explore how this works in more details, as well as speaking to people like Arosha and other church initiatives across Oxford to really think about what it would look like for churches to work together on issues like this. Creation Care offers an intergenerational opportunity to connect faith, justice and hope, but it seems there's a need for champions to lead collaboratively across theological differences and to mobilise grassroots creativity where possible around this theme. So you might be wondering, as I've been speaking, why we aren't planning to prioritise listening directly to people who have lived experience in these areas of work. It's come up again and again in our methodology for doing this kind of research, and we're really, really keen to do that. Things like people that struggle with addiction or homelessness or even parenting, we really want to hear from people that have the lived experience of those areas, and that will come. But right now, this is we're in a very early vision setting stage and momentum building through the churches. So where these areas of overlap are, that's where the energy for collaboration is. And as stronger relationships form around these specific themes, we expect that churches will begin listening together to people in those areas as they decide to work together in that specific area of work. And that's where the lasting transformation will happen. But first, we need to connect together and to discern, as Steve mentioned, where is the Spirit calling us to step in together. And as we've said, it might be that we've identified these 6 themes, but only 2 of them will really work, or one will really work first and then others will come. So we're kind of in that listening phase of working out who do we have in the room and how do we collaborate effectively around these issues to then listen together to people that are affected by them. So what is going to happen next? So for the next few months, we're continuing to gather these stories, as I've mentioned, through the conversations, online forums, focus groups, interviews. And we hope that will help to give us a city-wide picture of where churches are helping communities to thrive, where the struggle is, and where collaboration has the potential to unlock new things. And all of this listening work, we're hoping, will bring together as many people as possible through the churches and through civic partners at a launch event on the 18th of October. That's where we want to start having those deeper conversations to say, we all have that vision around those empty shops. How do we really make something like that happen? We would love that to be an opportunity in October for us to really start making these practical next steps, which will come off the back of all of this mapping and listening and connecting that we're doing in this period. So we hope that event will help us to highlight those overlaps, gaps and growth areas, facilitate those new working groups around those key issues, and we're really hoping to invite local and civic and public sector partners to join us in that conversation. So how can you get involved as we move forward? This process, as we've heard again and again today, is not going to work if there's just 1 or 2 of us trying to make this happen. This is a city-wide movement, and we need each other and we need diversity. It was never meant to be a group of professionals that work for Renew Oxford doing their own thing over here and telling everyone, this is the situation of Oxford, by the way. This is all of us. It takes everybody to be involved in making this happen. Renew Oxford is a shared platform, and it's only going to work if we all shape what it is. Its purpose is to help the whole church to connect and to act in unity. Mapping is simply the tool, but what it reveals through the real relationships and the stories can help us to discern where God is already moving and what more might be possible if we show up together. And if we're really serious about this transformation in Oxford, we need everyone, the project leaders, volunteers, prayers, planners, policy people, pastoral care. And there are 5 key ways that I wanted to highlight today that you might like to get involved. So could you get involved in those conversations that I mentioned before with project leaders or with volunteers to hear what they're seeing, what's going well, where collaboration could work? You don't need to be a researcher, you just have to have a conversation with somebody you know. And the QR codes will come up at the end. We really need people that are good at listening, that have curiosity to learn from each other, and are great at building relationships. Secondly, could you join the working group? So we currently meet every 6 weeks or so to shape the direction of this work. Think about who we're speaking to, what questions we're asking, and how to make sense of what's emerging. And you don't have to be a data expert to be involved in it. It just takes someone with desire to help connect the dots and to be involved in that kind of conversation. So if that could be you, let us know. Would you, on a slightly different tangent, like to help plan the launch event? So we could have a separate group that just thinks about that event in October. So if you're really good at event planning, communications, inviting people, we really need people that are great at logistics, programme planning, that kind of thing. So if you want to get involved in that, please let me know. And as Steve has rightly mentioned, and has come up again and again, we truly believe that all of this needs to be underlined with prayer and with worship. And we were really inspired by the unifying worship event at St Aldate's a couple of weeks ago. It felt like a real moment of so many churches coming together and just listening to God and being together and crossing those denominational boundaries and just being one body. And we came out of that thinking, we can't wait till next June to do that again. We really need to be thinking about how to make that work more regularly. So we haven't made any plans towards that kind of work yet, really, but just have the desire for it to happen. So if you have that heart and you want to help think about how we bring churches together around prayer, then again, reach out and share your ideas about how that could work. And finally, everyone always needs help with social media, whether it's designing visuals or social media posts, sharing testimonies, or helping us to summarise what comes out of the data and sharing it in a really tangible and easy to access way. It would be really great to hear from you as well. So in summary, we don't have to do everything. No one could do all of those things. It's impossible for us to come up with a strategic plan that meets all 5 of those areas. If it just takes us even a small step to listen, connect, and invite others in, then we're already building the kind of city-wide church that can be this real witness of God's love. So I'd love you to ask yourself where you fit into this picture, whose story you could help bring light to, and what connections you could help to make at this point in time. Because this isn't about creating a new structure. This isn't a big new citywide church we're trying to build. It's about nurturing the body that already exists, becoming more visible, more united, and more responsive to God's call together. So let's keep listening and praying and showing up in this unity. The transformation isn't ours to force, but it's ours to join in with what God is doing. So to move into our next section, I would love us to get up and to move around the room. And some of the questions I've asked are now strategically placed around the room. And we'd really love your insights on them. I can't remember where I've placed what now. But there's a question over here around what are the barriers. So we've already touched on some of those today already, but it'd be great to name them and write them down that we're facing, specifically in Oxford, around unity connecting. There's a question around who should be in the room, who do we need to invite in October, from your church, from other churches, from civic leaders, strategic people who need to hear what the church is doing in Oxford. Please, maybe don't write their email addresses, probably a GDPR breach, but if you could let us know the direction of people that you think should be in the room in October, that'd be great. Directly in front of me, behind you, is somewhere you can vote on those 6 areas I've mentioned. Which feels to you like it could really we could start to shift the dial on how we work together as churches across the city. There's a board over there about your dream. What is it that God's put on your heart for the city of Oxford? To share it on that page. And there's another one here. What could prayer and worship look like? Any thoughts you have that, if you don't want to connect with us, feel free to just write your thoughts there about what that could look like, and we'll start to dream that together. So we'll do that for about 10 minutes, and then I'll bring us back together to have some smaller conversations where we'll collect some more thoughts in a conversational way. That would be great. Thank you very much.